Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Los Angeles County Planning Department's Community Planning Month speaker series titled Planning Among Oaks. My name is Caroline Chen. I'm a senior planner in the Advanced Planning Division, and I'm today's moderator. Today's session is co-sponsored by the Los Angeles section of the American Planning Association, and this session was produced by the LA County Planning Advanced Planning social media team. We'll begin with the County of Los Angeles land acknowledgement. Next. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Quiche, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. We acknowledge that as they continue their stewardship of these lands, that settler colonization has resulted in land seizure, disease, subjugation, slavery, relocation, broken promises, genocide, and multi-generational trauma. This acknowledgement demonstrates our responsibility and commitment to truth, healing, and reconciliation, and to elevating the stories, culture, and community of the original inhabitants of Los Angeles County. We're grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these ancestral lands. We're dedicated to growing and sustaining relationships with Native peoples and local tribal governments, including, in no particular order, the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, Gabrielino Tongva Indians of California Tribal Council, Gabrielino Tongva San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians Quiche Nation, San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, and the San Fernando Band of Mission Indians. To learn more about the First Peoples of Los Angeles County, please visit the Los Angeles City County Native American Indian Commission website at lanaic.lacounty.gov. Next, I'd like to note that interpretation services in Spanish and Chinese are available for this event. And what you do is you go to the globe and then you would select the language that you need. Next. This is our 7th annual American Planning Association Community Planning Month speakers event. These events focus on important and compelling issues in the field of planning. Videos of recent past events may be found on the LA County Planning YouTube site. We will send out a follow-up email after this event with a link to this YouTube channel as well as a link to the AICP CM credits. Next. Today, we will be discussing oak trees and the varied roles that they have in providing ecological services, in contributing to community character, and in shaping the outcomes of land use and other policy decisions historically and also now. The session's intent is to explore the historical development of oak tree land cover in Los Angeles County and consider the factors that have led to its current state of coverage today. From this vantage point, we examine GIS mapping strategies for documenting oak tree coverage and providing a foundation for assessing the effectiveness of policy interventions, such as zoning code regulations. Approaches to community engagement focused on oak trees will be illustrated to show how education around the benefits of oak trees can encourage communities to embrace and protect them. The role that land use planning has in protecting oak trees and ensuring social equity in their management will also be explored. Next. Our presenters today are Dr. Eric Wood, Associate Professor at Cal State Los Angeles, Daniel Hoffman, the Principal GIS Analyst at Los Angeles County Planning, and Rosie Daggett, biologist and arborist with the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains. Mark Herwick, supervising planner at Los Angeles County Planning, is today's commenter. We'll close out with discussion and questions and answers. We invite everyone to contribute to the chat and participate during the Q&A session at the end. This event is eligible for one AICP CM community or sustainability and resilience credit. Before we begin, we have a few words from our APA Los Angeles partner, Elena Salcido. Elena currently serves as the director of the Los Angeles section of the American Planning Association. Elena, please.
Hi, thank you. So as mentioned, my name is Elena Salcido, and I am the APA Los Angeles section director uh, for the rest of this year and last year. So we represent planners of all kinds, whether formally trained or community-based, and advocate for good planning and practice in Los Angeles and beyond. Our core values are inclusion, leadership, integrity, community, commitment to public service, and sustainability. I want to thank our sponsors and the Los Angeles County Department of Regional Planning for allowing us to participate in this conversation. And we want to extend an invite to both seasoned and emerging planners to get involved with us. And we are currently recruiting for our new board, actually, and for committee members. Our board recruitment closes tomorrow at midnight. And we're also planning a holiday party for early December. I encourage everyone to use either of those methods to just get more involved. So we invite folks to stay connected with us by going to our website, apalosangeles.org, or in following us on social media to stay updated. And hopefully we can provide a link to our website at the follow-up to this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elena. Now I'm going to turn the session over to Dr. Eric Wood.
All right, thank you all for being here. And I don't know if you can see me right now, but I'm standing in a classroom. There's 40 students sitting here. I can't pick up the computer right now, but I want you guys all to say hello very loud. 1, 2, 3. Hello. Okay. So we have an immersive experience here on my end. And what I'm going to do today is share some of our research over the past 10 years since I've been a professor at Cal State LA. I run the lab of avian and urban ecology. We focus a lot of our effort on understanding how birds and insects use the urban ecosystem throughout LA. And for this presentation, I'm going to dive in with focusing on some of our results about oaks, equity, and wildlife. Next slide, please. For the roadmap here, what I would like to do is first look at a historic lens about the distribution of our historic ecosystems in the Los Angeles area and really focus in on where we would have found oaks. And then I'm going to transition within that historic context to focus on a particular bird, the Anna's hummingbird. This is an oak specialist species and where they were distributed and where we can find them now. Then we're going to move in to talk about contemporary patterns of our urban forest and oaks and also birds and who gets to experience them. And what I'm going to focus on in the contemporary section is the effect that redlining has had on our current distribution of the urban forest. And then we're going to focus on the future and things that we can do in terms of preserving biodiversity in the city and some actions that we can accomplish to continue to make a city that's going to be good for biodiversity and people. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is an image of downtown LA in the late 1890s, and you can see from this image the early formation of the grid. The LA River is clearly visible going from left to right. It's not channelized at this time. You can see our agricultural past in terms of some of the ag lands, especially on the east side of the LA River. And, when we're thinking of this image, it's been a rapid ascent in terms of getting to this. Next slide, please. To the LA that we all know and love right now. And one of the things that I do since I've been here for 10 years, I'm not a native Angelino, But I am a native Californian. I've been all over the state many, many, many times. And one of the things that I love to do when I'm driving around LA is just think, what did it used to look like in this area? Was it always, of course, it's not always this, but what used to be the historic ecosystems that we would have found? And that's what me and a bunch of my colleagues have worked on with the LA Historical Ecology Project. These are colleagues from UCLA, Travis Longcore, USC, Phil Ethington, and others from Cal State Northridge, Cal State Long Beach, and then also Cal State LA. Next slide, please. And so that was one of our first questions was what were the historic ecosystems of the area? So you guys could probably all think about where you're sitting right now in LA. And let's look at the next map and the next slide, please. And we could think about what the historic ecosystems, this is like pre-Indigenous peoples times, what we think it used to be in the area. If you were flying out of LAX, you would have been flying straight through grasslands and dunes. There are some of the dune ecosystems in that area. The San Fernando Valley would have been covered in grasslands. Please go back to the last slide. So there might be a timer on this one. The mountains would have had our chaparral, but really the take home here is that you don't see a lot of woodland or that riparian area. Those would have been the treed landscapes, and LA really didn't have a ton of trees in the basins. It was mostly low-statured vegetation. Now, as an ornithologist, one of the things that I love to do is if I can take a map like this and I can pair it with bird data, then I could start doing some fancy statistics to start seeing which birds used to occur in an area. So next slide, please. So this is a distribution of historical bird, egg, and nest records collected in LA from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. And Los Angeles was a real hotbed for collections during this time. There are famous collectors, sorry, previous slide. There are famous collectors in the area, Joseph Grinnell, and so on and so forth, who would go out, collect eggs, collect nests from birds, write down notes about where these used to occur, and they did this for many, many, many species. And so we have about 7,000 plus records just from the area. If you overlay these egg and nest records on top of the historic ecosystem maps, then we can really get a sense of the historical avifauna of Los Angeles. And we did this for about 150 bird species, but I want to focus on one right now that's going to be important to oaks. So next slide, please. So this is our Anna's hummingbird, and this is the only graph I'm going to show here, but the students in this class will recognize that this is from a logistic regression analysis, a little bit more complicated than that. But what you will see here is a positive trend that with the amount of foothill and valley woodland, which is on the x-axis, and then the occurrence of Anna's hummingbirds, the historical occurrence. So these birds were going to occur where there was foothill and valley woodland. Next animation, please. And this is what it would look like where historically you would have found Anna's hummingbirds. Note that you would not see this bird throughout all of Los Angeles. You would find them confined to the foothills and the low-statured mountains of the Santa Monica Mountains, the Puente Hills, and then the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains as well. That's really where we had our oak and walnut woodlands, and that's where you would have found these birds occurring. Now, if you were to step outside of Los Angeles today, where do you think you might find these birds when you're looking at this map? Next slide, please. Well, the Anna's hummingbird occurs really all throughout Los Angeles. They will breed basically everywhere throughout the city. So there's been a huge increase in these birds occurring here. And one of the things that I love to do when I'm looking at these maps and the distributions of these maps and how they change over time is just asking that basic question about why. Next slide, please. This is an image of Olive Avenue in Burbank, California in the late 1800s, and you can see there's not a lot of trees in this area. The inset map up on your top right, you can see that dark blue or dark black, I guess black rectangle or square, and you could see that there were no Anna's hummingbirds in this location, and it's obvious why. There was no habitat for them there. Let's fast forward to the next slide and look at what Olive Avenue looks like now. I tried to find that exact location. I don't know if I did it, but what you will see in this image are coast live oak trees planted in the margins along the sidewalks. If you plant habitat like this, coast live oak trees are loved by Anna's hummingbirds. They nest in them, they forage on the underside of the leaves for insect larvae. And if you put nectar sources down, such as ornamental plants, which we've done all throughout the city, a bird like this is going to blossom in terms of their population and really take off. So with our urban forest, we've really created habitat that has benefited many, many species, but it's come at the detriment of many, many species as well. The grassland birds, the riparian birds, the coastal sage scrub birds, and many birds of conservation concern are all doing very, very poorly because they can't live in conditions like this. But we're focused on oaks, we're focused on the urban forests, so this is the highlight about we actually have expanded habitat for many of these animals. So let's go on to the next slide, please. So if you're curious about which trees are most useful to birds in Los Angeles, this is from research that we published in 2020. And what you want to notice and focus on here are the little green and yellow birds. And if there is a tree species with lots of green and yellow birds, it means that we observed many, many birds feeding on those trees. And the big one here is over on the right. That's going to be coast live oak. They are absolutely the foundation for a lot of our bird species in terms of foraging, because they have so many insects, they have acorns, they have all these resources that birds will use. And of course, they are a native tree. Another native tree, the California sycamore, birds still use it, but just not in the frequency that you'll find in coast live oak. Non-native trees, which are going to be on the left side of this map, Chinese elm, camphor tree, American sweet gum, we notice birds feeding in there. So it's not that all non-native trees are not good for birds, but you just have no comparison when you're talking about really the king queen of this, and that's going to be the coast live oak. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so moving on to contemporary patterns. And what I want to do is just talk about the distribution of our urban forest and some factors that have influenced. So next slide. So historically, as I was mentioning, this is Boyle Heights. Many of us, all of us have seen these images when we've been driving around LA with the skyline in the background. And depending on where you are in the city, it might look very different. And so, of course, as we just covered, LA was not a forested landscape. But today, it's one of the most diverse urban forests on the planet. There's hundreds of tree species that we've planted from all over the planet that are doing well and thriving. But the question that we've had in my lab is, are these trees distributed equitably across the city? Next slide, please. And what I want to introduce to you, if you've not heard of this, is this idea called the luxury effect. The luxury effect is this idea that biodiversity is correlated with wealth. And we can really see that this is a tale as old as Los Angeles. And I'll talk about what that means. So if you're in an area like Boyle Heights, which is a lower income area, a median income area such as Southgate, or a high income area like San Marino, the amount of trees you see in these locations changes radically. Often our high income parts of Los Angeles are either coastal or up against the foothills where there was already historically going to be trees, but lots of trees in those locations. Next animation, please. And if you do some work on this, and you can do the next animation as well. And we've done a lot of work on this where we've gone out and quantified the amount of tree cover in these locations. And if you look, there's just this rapid expansion in ordered category class, going from low to medium to high. So the question that I had, not being from here, and I've always lived in kind of small towns, college towns, was this idea about where did this come from that you can just drive from San Marino and not go very far and things change so rapidly. I live in the San Gabriel Valley. That's what I keep talking about, San Marino. Okay, next slide. So, and that gets to this idea about redlining. And I'm embarrassed to say I didn't even know what redlining was in 2015 when I first started as a professor in Los Angeles, but my lab and students kept talking about this. And then in 2020, a major project came out that digitized all the historic redlining maps. So you could actually see the spatial locations of where, you'll see on this map of where this practice was occurring. Now, what was redlining? So redlining was a practice that happened in the 1930s all the way up to the 1960s. And this was a federal, it blows my mind when I talk about this, but this was initiated at the federal government. So the Homeowners Loan Corporation, it was a US government-sponsored program initiated in the 1930s. Its whole goal was to evaluate mortgage lending risk. And this was following the Great Depression, where the mortgage lending system was in complete disarray. So the program resulted in these hand-drawn security risk maps. And so what you can see here is a security risk map for West LA and getting into downtown and a little bit of East LA. And what these maps were doing was to intend for appraisers to see sections of cities where you should invest. Those are going to be the green and blue locations, to areas of the city where you should not invest, which would be the yellow and the red. And the redlined areas were actually deemed as hazardous. And so that's where that idea with redlining comes up in terms of investment. So the security risk maps, they've been widely criticized as being inherently racist and also classist since then, and they've been associated with all sorts of downstream issues with public health, et cetera. And our question was, well, is this was this redlining practice, was this also distributed, or is it correlated with modern day birds and forest cover in the city? So next slide, please. So this is a big graph. I'm not going to walk through the whole thing here, but this was from a paper we recently published. And the big punchline here is that redlining continues to be related to avifaunal community patterns, their habitat, and the people who experience them. And so what do I mean by that in terms of people who experience them? If you still look at the distribution of who is living in the green lined, the blue lined, the yellow lined, and the red lined areas, the green lined areas are still majority white, still some of the most expensive places in LA. Think of Beverly Hills, Bel Air. These were already places that were on the up back in the 30s, and they were just given the green light in terms of investment. On the other hand, the red lined areas and the yellow lined areas are primarily Hispanic or Latino in Los Angeles, and these were locations that were already struggling in some form because they were maybe near oil wells or in flood prone areas, but that's where the investment was not necessarily happening at a high rate. And so if you look at that and you go to some of the green lined areas right now, of course, they have tons of trees. So the yellow-rumped warbler bird down on the left, that's where you're going to find these birds foraging for insects, doing their thing, living their best life. And if you want to ask that question about who gets to experience these yellow-rumped warblers from just going and taking their dog on a walk, it's going to be people that are living in green-lined and blue-lined areas that are going to have a higher chance to experience birds like this. On the other hand, I love house finches, but on the right-hand side, this is more of a synanthropic bird, so a species that's adapted to dense urban conditions, and you're going to find these species much more common in the red-lined and yellow-lined areas. And so these are birds that you might see if you're going to take your dog on a walk in, say, Boyle Heights. So the take-home here, at least for us at Cal State LA, many students, we think about this, it's the lived experience of growing up in places like Boyle Heights. We have many students at Cal State LA from the East LA area. And when they think about this, they just think, gosh, I've always known about this pattern, but we just wanted to simply put some numbers on this. So next slide, please. Okay, so now I want to focus on the future and some things that we can do that are going to be important in terms of promoting biodiversity that's going to benefit people and, of course, just the animals and plants that we want to be thriving in the city. So next slide. So one of the areas where we do a lot of research in my lab is focused on residential yards as habitat for wildlife. And Los Angeles being a mecca for suburbia, if we were just to look at a Google Earth image of the whole entirety of greater Los Angeles, so much of the land cover are single-use house area, single-family zoned house locations like you see right here. And a considerable amount of the land cover of these locations are the front and the backyard. So next slide, please. And so when you drive around LA, and this is very common for us to see, that about 70% of greater LA is residential, and maybe 99, this is just me making up these numbers, a 99% number, it's just what it feels like. The residential areas look like this, grasses, hedge, we've all seen this. So next slide, please. But now a lot of people are starting to do what you just saw right here, converting their yards to native plants. There's a lot of motivating factors for why to do this. It could be because there's rebate programs like LADWP. It could be because you want wildlife and monarch butterflies and birds or whatever in your yard. Whatever the reason, many more people are starting to do this. And our question in my lab was, if we're doing this on scale throughout Los Angeles, are we really making a big difference for birds, for pollinators, for insects? I think we all know the answer, but again, we wanted to quantify this. Okay, next slide. So I just want to do a simple cartoon graphic here, which just highlights lots of research in my lab. So what does native plant landscaping do for our wildlife? Of course, you're going to have way more birds in yards that are landscaped with native plants because those birds are going to be adapted to finding food on the native plants where there's going to be insects that they know how to eat, they know what to go look for. There might be the acorns on the oaks or whatever it might be. You're going to have far more insect pollinators using these locations because the insects are going to be adapted also to finding nectar sources and also breeding on the native plants. And then you're going to get far more complex food webs and also pollinator networks in these native landscape yards. So all in all, a big win. And if we could do this, say like convert those 70% of yards, 5% of them to native plant landscaping, it would make a huge difference in terms of biodiversity in the city. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just in summary, let's just talk and bring this all the way back about the oak update and why this is all important when thinking about some of the research that we were doing here, looking at the historic to contemporary to future times. Okay, next slide. Okay, so where do we go from here for oaks, equity, and wildlife? So why does it update for the oak ordinance? Why does all this matter? So we need to protect and keep healthy oaks on sites, design around them, require best practice care to restore or replace lost oaks with native oaks if we can, and have an understory that's going to prioritize climate-ready species. I think often our shrub-affiliated birds are going to love it if we're going to put some native shrubs down. Equity, target new planting plus long-term stewardship in historically under-canopied areas. I think many of us already know this, but in practice, it's much more difficult. And so continuing to work on this is really important. So what residents can do, so we can plant. And so if you have space to do this, plant native. Plant an oak in your yard, whether it's a coast live oak, an Engelmann oak, a valley oak, wherever you're living, do that. Put some shrubs and some forbs, some native plants down. You will notice immediately, if you put a narrowleaf milkweed in your yard, you are going to have monarchs start coming to your yard pretty quickly, and it's pretty awesome when you do that. Okay, so we really want to rebuild this habitat in yards, parkways, and schools, and then support funding for street tree care, watering, pruning, so those trees can survive. That's a big deal. And then join the neighborhood planting. If there's other things going on, just be a part of your community. Because really, when we're thinking about biodiversity in the city, often if we can do this from the bottom up as community-led initiatives, that's where you really get people excited about really preserving what's in their neighborhood. Okay, so what the science says in one line: native plantings, more birds, more pollinators, more complex food webs, healthier, cooler neighborhoods, and oaks are a big part of that. So, all right. So with gratitude, I want to definitely thank Carolyn Chen for inviting me to do this, and also Mark Herwick for all their work with putting this together. And I think that's it for me. So, oh yeah, there's one other thing I want to say. If you have not seen this, and if you're working on planning and you're also in a position where you can influence some of the landscaping practices, there's a great document out called Tree Care for Wildlife, Best Management Practices. And you know, when we're thinking about this, there's lots of cool things in here about when to prune trees, how to inspect for nests and adjust work to avoid harming birds and other wildlife, preserve deadwood and native trees like the coast live oak, and then follow really some of the ethics and safety reasons, safety protocols, so we can get a tree canopy that is aesthetically pleasing, but also balanced ecologically. Okay, I think that's it. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eric. Now I'm going to turn the session over to Daniel Hoffman.
Okay, thank you, Caroline, and thank you, Eric. That was an awesome presentation. Hey, everybody, I'm Dan Hoffman. I'm a principal GIS analyst with the LA County Planning Department. And today I'm going to share with you how we're using data-driven collaborative tools, GIS tools, to map out oak trees, and trees in general across Los Angeles County. And we're calling this effort the Tree Hub. Next. So just briefly what we'll cover, a quick background on our department, some key initiatives that inspired the creation of the Tree Hub, and going to do a walkthrough of some of the features of the Tree Hub. And then lastly, how we're using GIS to monitor oak tree permits and overall tree health. Next. So our planning department manages all the unincorporated areas of Los Angeles County, which you see on the yellow on the map on the right. We have nearly 200 employees, including a dedicated GIS team of 8. And our GIS section manages a full suite of web mapping applications that help the public explore data, visualize change, and better understand how the built and natural environments interact. Next. So here are some of the initiatives that have helped set the foundation for our tree mapping efforts. One of them is the Community Forest Management Plan, LA County's first, and it charts a path to a cooler, greener, more connected urban forest. We have the Oak Tree Program, which balances preservation with progress, protecting native oaks, refining permitting, and encouraging thoughtful design. We have the Oak Tree Pest Management, which strengthens defenses against invasive pests like the gold-spotted oak borer, or GSOB. And that's done through inspection, education, and restoration. And then the Tree Committee, which unites departments to essentially implement the Community Forest Management Plan's vision to expand tree canopy, do more detailed mapping of oak trees, and improve pest management. Next. So this is a quote we have on our Tree Hub page, and it's kind of like our mission statement in a way. You know, we've got a lot of GIS data scattered across different platforms. So the Tree Hub was built as a central authoritative source for all tree-related information. It's live now, but it's continually evolving. As we partner with the different departments, cities, conservation groups, and universities, we're going to add more data, refine the data, and enhance the site itself. And back when I started doing GIS 26 years ago with this department, we had to create a lot of our own data in-house. And the different departments had GIS data, but they were all siloed. And you know, that's just the nature of the technology infrastructure back then in the late 90s. So nowadays we have the opposite problem. You know, we're swimming in data. We're actually drowning in data sometimes. There's thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands GIS layers published online, and not all of them are authoritative. So that's the key of this hub site, to get people to the authoritative data sets. And you'll see an example of that later. Next. So this is what the Tree Hub site looks like. You'll notice the green bar at the top. That's how you navigate through the different sections. We're going to start with the home section. We have 4 right now, but that we may add to that in the future. And this is a GIS-enabled website that houses web mapping applications, maps, data, narrative, photos, and it's all in one shareable, easy to navigate place. Next. So when we're talking about tree data, this is a really cool concept. My colleague Caroline actually came up with this. So when we're talking about tree data, we're talking about, and a lot of different types of data too, blanket data and quilt data. So blanket data you could think of as a data set that covers the entire region of LA County or big regions within it, captured at the same time, has the same data structure. Typically this is from remote sensing, like land cover or tree canopy data sets, but it could even be something like assessor parcel data as well that covers the whole county. Now the quilt data is a patchwork of different data sets from different jurisdictions, each collected in their own unique ways depending on the jurisdiction's need and with varying levels of detail and timing. Next. So speaking of the quilt, this is the Tree Universe app that we made. And this is a standalone web mapping application, but it's also nested within the Tree Hub as well. And this is the mosaic of data sets from the different departments. We've got street tree inventories, maintenance records, pest observations. Now it's important to note that this is not a full representation of all the data that different agencies are working on. Some data is not publicly available because there might be sensitive information or other reasons for not having that be publicly available. But part of the evolution of this hub site is working with our partner agencies to see if we can get live versions of these data sets that we can share out. Next. Okay, this is an example of a blanket data set. This is a countywide land cover data set using 2020 imagery. And it's a basic classification of trees, vegetation, bare ground, and impervious surfaces across the region. It's countywide. So it provides a valuable big picture view, but it's also detailed enough to be useful if you're working on at the project or parcel level. Next. Okay, now we're at the oak tree section, and this section introduces why oaks are so vital to LA County. They support biodiversity, and Eric did a great job illustrating that with the food webs and the different birds that like oak trees. They help stabilize soils, they enhance fire resiliency, and they really define our natural landscapes. Next. So part of the hub site is a list of the major oak species that are found in different regions of the county. And each one has their own unique ecological roles and characteristics that make them worth protecting. And some of these, like the Engelmann oak shown at the bottom here, there's a green Learn More button. So if you click on that, that'll take you on a deeper dive into this unique tree. Next. Of course, oaks face a lot of serious threats, from invasive pests to climate stress and habitat loss. Again, you'll see that green Learn More button that talks about the invasive pests. And part of our goal in developing this tree hub is to have more of these green Learn More buttons, because the hub site is good for giving you a summary of things and an overview, and then providing links for you to take deeper dives into something you might be more interested in. Next. Okay, so GIS data. Right now, there's a single point of entry into the hub site to get to the GIS layers. It's just the little tree icon that you can click on, but you can also do keyword searches in the search bar above. Now, as I mentioned, this site is still in development, and as we get more data and as we partner more with others, we want to expand this, and have more categories and different icons. So if you've ever been to another open data hub site, you've probably seen these with multiple icons with different categories. So that's the goal here, but for now, it's this single point of entry. So when you click on that icon, next, this brings you to the list of data sets we have. So on the right is a scrollable list of data sets, and on the left are some search filters. So right now you can search by just data, web mapping applications, or documents. But as I said, as we get more data, we'll add more filters. Yeah, and you can also filter by department source and those sorts of things. And next. So this is one of our data sets that's linked from the hub. It's a tree point data set for all the urban areas in the county. And it's an impressive data set. It's got all the tree points. Now, the points themselves are just points. There's no real data attached to them. There's no species information. But nonetheless, it could be a good tool for you if you're looking at a project area and see what your impact might be on tree canopy or the count of trees in the area. And it can also give you a sense of urban forest patterns. Now you'll notice on the left, you'll see that green view full details button. So when you click on that, next. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about authoritative data sets. This has full metadata. It links to different methodologies. It links to the journal article that was published about this from Cal State SLO. And, it's just, you look at this like, yeah, this has been well vetted and it's authoritative, it's useful. Some of you might have gone onto ArcGIS Online looking for data. You might see a layer called trees_version1 draft, and then you click on it and there's very little or no description. There's no thumbnail, so you don't really know if you can trust it. So our mission with this tree hub is to have data sets that have this kind of documentation. Okay, next. So the last section, tools and resources, it's kind of a mix of things, but I'll just highlight one part of it. This is a link to the different GIS mapping applications that relate to trees. And it doesn't have to be just LA County either. You know, a lot of parts of the state and in Southern California having issues with monitoring trees and dealing with climate stress and all those sorts of things. So web mapping applications are good for, of course, seeing data sets, but it's also good for visualizing things. Some of these apps have nice graphs and dashboards, and so we want to showcase these in this section here. Next. Okay, so part of what makes this, of what's going to make this tree hub really great is that it's going to grow with the people we partner with. So we want to collaborate with you. So there's a quick survey that's embedded in the home section at the bottom of the home section. And if you see data that's missing, if you know of some other studies or some web apps that would be great to showcase here, or app functionality, maybe some things aren't working for you and you have some suggestions, please let us know that. You know, we want to make this a good site. We want this to be good for everyone who's using it. Next. Okay, I'm going to move outside of the tree hub for now. I want to talk about some of the oak tree permit monitoring that we're doing with GIS. This is kind of a pilot project we're taking on, us and some of my colleagues. So this data is not really public facing yet, but we hope it will be someday. So what you see here is that green polygon is the outline of the permit. And the permit could be one parcel, could be several parcels, or a whole big undeveloped tract. And then the points you see there are the trees that could be impacted by this project. Next. As you click on each tree, you'll get a pop-up, and each tree stores details like species, protection status, potential impacts, and permit number too, which is important because it'll tie the points to that permit polygon that's in our permitting system. So this gives you a sense of the tree inventory, that what might be impacted and what's going on with these trees. Next. Monitoring is key. So each tree record can also include some time-stamped photos, and that's what you see on the bottom of this pop-up on the left-hand side. So you see tree monitoring, you know, the two different pictures, and that's part of what we're trying to do. It helps visualize how these trees are doing, you know, as time moves on. Next. And this is an example of one of those tree photos that you can access through that pop-up. So the long-term goal of this is a digital map of oak trees for unincorporated areas. We want this to be directly integrated into the permitting process. And we're still kind of working on the technical details of that, but we're making good headway. And this project will lay the groundwork for proactive, data-informed oak stewardship. And maybe this will inspire other jurisdictions to do the same. So yeah, that's what I've got. And next slide. Thank you for your time and attention. Here's a link to the Tree Hub once again. And I'm going to turn you over to Rosie Daggett, who will make a compelling case about the importance of oak trees and why they're so crucial.
Thank you so much, Daniel. All right, Rosie, take it away.
Well, thank you. Greetings, everyone. It's lovely to see you all. I get to kind of pose some ideas and thoughts for you to consider as we go further into why oak trees are so important and why we need them. Next, please. But before I get into that, I would really like to thank everybody who has contributed to the stories that I'm about to tell you, because this is a multi-pronged effort with over many years with many contributors. And I want to specifically thank Carolyn and Mark and Iris and the team at LA County Planning. For those of you who don't know, Los Angeles County was the first county in the state of California in 1982 to enact an oak tree protection ordinance. And in 2011, the county also enacted the Los Angeles County Oak Woodland Conservation Management Plan. And so LA County has a long history of taking care of and being considerate of its oaks. And I just want to say thank you for all of that. Next. I also wanted to specifically call out the NASA developed partners that we've worked with at the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena. This is a really wonderful program for recent college graduates. They spend 10 weeks working with leaders at NASA, and they answer community provided questions. And they have generously given us of their time for 3 different things. And I'll share a little bit about what we've learned thanks to them as we go through this. Next, please. So why trees and why oak trees? As we're looking at climate change scenarios, when we're looking at changes in how we're thinking and managing stormwater runoff, how we're thinking and managing heat island effects in our built environments, trees are really a critical piece of the puzzle. And often we think of trees as objects rather than recognizing that trees are living beings that have contributions to us in a variety of different ways. Next. So what can oak trees teach us? Next. I think one of the biggest things that I hear, having spent 35 years plus as an arborist and biologist in Los Angeles County, is that trees are really important to people. And there's very rarely a person who doesn't have 1 or 2 trees that are special to them for one reason or another at some point in time in their life. And the sense of place that we get and our personal geography often defines how we see the world. So having trees in it, specifically oak trees in Southern California, is pretty important. Next, please. So for over 4 million years, there have been oak trees in the Northern Hemisphere. In Los Angeles County, they really became a huge piece of the puzzle at the end of the last ice age. And this was the time when we had woolly mammoths and mastodons who apparently really loved acorns, along with the rise of our indigenous cultures. And between the two of them, those 2 factors, we found that there was this real interplay of increasing oak woodland cover to support the indigenous community. And that therefore supported other creatures as well. Next, please. I think as planners, it's really important to recognize the role that oak trees play in terms of ecosystem services. There's been extensive research that shows that having a riparian covered waterway through your city can reduce your costs for stormwater runoff prevention and care and pollution control. The tree cover provides incredible air pollution and temperature modification. And of course, they hold our hills up, which is not an insignificant thing. Next, please. Another reason I think it's important to speak about oak trees in particular is because they define home, not only for a lot of Angelenos, but also for the other creatures that live with us in this environment. Next. Eric pointed out the importance of oak trees and bird species, but there's actually about 150 species of birds, 100 species of mammals, about 58 species of reptiles and amphibians, 5 species of fish, and over 5,000 species of insects that are only on this planet because they have access to oak trees. So when you think of oaks as a keystone species, they're the hub of the wheel. And if we take them out of the picture, all these other species disappear. Next, please. And the way they do that is because of the diversity of habitats, and also because the oak woodlands create a community, and that community is collaborative. There's a lot of really interesting research recently talking about how trees communicate with each other over space and over time. And the role that this plays in creating an environment that people want to live in is a really important thing for us as planners to be considering. Next. And just because it's one of the least talked about ecosystem services benefits of trees in particular, but oaks specifically, is that carbon sequestration and storage is really something we should be considering and thinking about within our planning framework. And oak trees play a huge role as a carbon storage area. Next. Another point I'd like to kind of put into your mind is the idea that tree time and people time is very different. And persistence, in the spite of all the threats that these trees experience day in and day out, is something that we can all learn from. This is an example of a majestic valley oak that was retained in this when this shopping center was built in the early 1980s. And sadly, this tree fell over about 10 years ago. So for 40 years, it survived this very challenging environment and continued to provide all those ecosystem benefits in this isolated location. And I think as we go forward with our planning efforts, considering the fact that this is a living organism that lives for hundreds of years and whose physiological responses are somewhat different on a timeline that's not the same as ours, is a really important thing to think of. Because I'm sure the planners who 40 years ago said, oh yeah, this tree, we're gonna save this tree. Well, they did for a part of the time, but not for all the time going forward. Please, next. And now what we're dealing with is a kind of different environment with extreme heat days that are coming fast and furiously. Often they're occurring in the early summer to late fall when the trees are doing their most important work in terms of putting out new leaves and creating acorns. So when these huge heat impacts occur, everything dies. And when you have tied that into long-term drought, these are real, very persistent problems that we can think about as planners how to ameliorate. Next. And then, of course, we have the new bad beetles, who are the latest threat that's come to town. And already we've lost hundreds and hundreds of oak trees as a result of these beetles. So the interplay between invasive species, invasive pests, drought, heat, and all the development pressures that we put on these trees make it a real challenge to grow trees for the future. Next. So why do we want to plant oaks in particular? Because we care about what our communities are going to look like 100 years from now. And what we've learned is that in the natural systems, the oaks are reproducing in pulses, and they're not very effective pulses in terms of keeping the entirety of our oak woodlands going into the future. We actually have primarily mature to senescing trees in our landscapes, and we need to think about how are we going to actively manage going forward so we don't lose these important keystone species. Next. So with that in mind, we worked with the NASA developed team to use their remote sensing equipment to answer a few questions and to think about how do we conceptually identify opportunities on where to plant, what to plant, and to do this in a way that allows for flexibility and adaptation. And thanks to Katie, she just put the link for this in the chat. So if you're interested in seeing this document and looking and diving in more, there's a link to get you there. Next, please. We started by looking at the kinds of maps that Dan was talking about that show us where are the currently existing oak woodlands, what do they look like, where are they fragmented, what does this tell us about our land use, and how can we do better as we move forward. Next. So with the help of the NASA team who used Avarice and USVA-SAR, as well as information from the International Space Station, next, what we were able to do was to pull together this massive set of data, primarily focusing on the Santa Monica Mountains portion of Los Angeles County, but it kind of set us up to be able to think about and look at where do we want to increase redundancy? How do we manage for successional disturbances and diebacks and fires? And what actions can we take to promote dispersal, establishment, and movement of these important trees? Next. So this led us to really think about how do we classify the areas that we have available? Is there habitat that's going to remain suitable into the future? Is there habitat that's not going to be suitable in 100 years? And is there habitat that is able to be restored? It's not suitable now, but it could be if we take some actions to move that direction. Next. So that led us to really think hard about the fact that most of our current distribution is based on establishment conditions from a long time ago. And if we're going to think about where we want trees to be in 100 years, we can't use those conditions because they're not the same. And we have to think about where is the temperature going to change, where is the drainage is going to change, and where have we fragmented things, and how can we move things as the climate change increases heat? Are we going to be thinking about assisted migration, and how do we do that? Next. So all of these considerations are much more fleshed out in the priority planting plan that I mentioned, but I think it's important for you as planners to think about how do you integrate these really large scale environmental constraints into your planning framework, because these are really important things to be thinking about now when we're thinking about what we want to have in our communities in 100 years. Next. And as Eric pointed out, the coast live oak tree was the hero for the birds. Well, the coast live oak tree is the hero for all of us, because this is a map that was created using the remote sensing data. And it also looked at temperatures and precipitation patterns under the worst case climate scenario of the IPCC. And what was really impressive to see is that most of the area is green and purple, with only a few yellow zones where there's not a lot of opportunity for oaks to grow and thrive 100 years from now based on these climate predictions. So oaks hold the key for us to be able to restore not only the biodiversity, but the ecosystem services and all of these other important elements. Next, please. And while we're thinking big picture, I think we really also need to not forget that oaks provide habitat for all those species. So using them to reconnect isolated, fragmented habitat and to use them to enhance wildlife corridors and abilities for wildlife to move and migrate from one area to another is a really important piece of the puzzle too. Next. And last, but certainly not least, is the impacts to wildfire. And I saw in the chat a question about how will planting oaks and the new Zone Zero legislation that's being considered and those regulations. But oaks are really key in this, because not only do these evergreen canopies capture embers and reduce the transfer of embers to houses, it allows us to create these buffer zones. And there's been some really interesting analysis post the Palisades and Eaton and Woolsey fires that's looking at how do the trees functionally protect houses. And so I think paying attention to that as we plant is also an important thing. Next. So what can we do? How can you as planners help and ensure that as we go forward into the future, our oak woodlands and ecosystems are able to survive and thrive? Next. It all comes down to planting for the future and thinking strategically and putting these trees wherever we think we can give them the conditions that they're going to grow and thrive over time, and creating these multi-dimensional habitats and connected communication pathways for the trees and other vegetation that will support all the animals into the future. Next. You can also engage our communities in helping in the areas that they like to recreate. What we've been doing at the RCD is we've sponsored an Adopt an Oak program where we ask hikers in all of our state parks and national parklands that have thriving oak woodlands that they carry along a little extra water and they adopt one of the trees along the trail. And as they go hiking, they add some water to the tree along the way. It's a great way to reconnect people to their landscape. Next. We've also been collaborating with the UC Agricultural Natural Resources teams to try to get as many people as we can become eyes on the ground and allow them to go out and know what to look for. Getting the handle on these bad beetle infestations early is critical to containing them. And we really appreciate and need as many eyes on the ground as we possibly can. Next. I just have to put in a little plug here that as planners, you don't really have much control. Actually, none of us have any control on where firewood comes and goes to, but it has become the huge, most important vector for spreading these insect pests and pathogens. And I just felt like I couldn't resist the opportunity to get you to think about how firewood can spread these pests and whatever you can do personally as well as professionally to help try to maintain firewood in the location where it is so as we don't spread pests to other new locations. Next. So it's not just me on my soapbox or the LA County planners on theirs, but there are lots of us that can work together, and you as planners should be connecting with and taking advantage of all these groups community-wide and that are spending a lot of time and energy thinking about how we can maintain and preserve our ecosystems, specifically our oak woodlands, into the future. Next. So this is a quote that I found many years ago, but I think it's particularly thought-provoking for those of you who are planners, that we as people create landscapes that reflect our morality, our humanity, and our culture. And these landscapes then in turn determine our fate. And I think we are fooling ourselves if we forget that the presence of these ecosystems that create our sense of place, that persist in our landscape, that provide all our ecosystem services. These are really important. And putting that into the mix as we're doing our planning going forward is a really critical piece of the puzzle. Next. So I leave you with the idea that growing hope by taking account of all of our important oak resources and enhancing them and growing them into the future is really a way forward that we can take real action and make a real difference. Next, please. Thanks to Eric for his important ideas, and thanks to Dan for showing how we can put all this information together in a way that will help with your planning efforts. And I just want to leave you with the thought that trees are living beings, and the more we take care of them, the more they will take care of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosie. Wonderful presentation. Now we have some comments from Mark.
Thank you very, very much. Again, thank you, Eric, Dan, and Rosie. Just terrific presentations. I mean, ranging from the excellent discussion about redlining, its implications for our social and natural worlds, the need for authoritative data, so crucial in making decisions and evaluating those decisions, particularly policy interventions, and then certainly the need for engagement amongst all different kinds of interested parties and stakeholders to further move the needle in protecting oak trees. And all the information that you provided today, each of you, what you provided informs the planning process. Fill in with the necessary data and tools to make the best and most equitable land use decisions. Planners are the ultimate interdisciplinary practitioners, and when it comes to implementing policy, there are many lenses through which to examine and analyze. And though fundamentally it's the scientific method that informs data collection and analysis, it's the administrative and political processes, ideally equitably engaged, that yield action decisions. So next slide, please. I think it should say the planner's perspective. With oaks as a case study, there's much that planners have to consider. Learning is a big part of preparing for implementation about historical processes, current conditions, and competing viewpoints. Today, we learn that planners must have a historical lens to know how things came to be, both the natural and social worlds. Existing conditions are often the starting point for planning analyses because planners and the communities they work with are thinking about the next steps, not past steps. But we need to oftentimes take a look at the past. It's important work to assess existing conditions. However, doing so accurately with purpose and documentation is crucial to ensure policy interventions are data-driven and, very importantly, can be evaluated over time. As has been shown with GIS visualizing land coverage of oaks, it's possible to move in the direction of further understanding the correlation of land use decisions and patterns of the natural environment. Further, at the core of the planning perspective is the engagement of community to shape the places they live and ensure voices are heard and deliberately and equitably integrated into the decision-making process. Some of the best partners with planners in educating communities about oak trees and their benefits are those who live among oak trees and have passion for their continued vitality and integration into the built world and natural world interface. From the planning perspective, to consider a sustainable and resilient future, think about past practices, assess their impacts, and learn from this and develop strategies and policy implementations and interventions to foster conditions that encourage living compatibly among oaks rather than at odds with oaks. I'm going to turn this session now back over to our moderator, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you, Eric, Daniel, and Rosie for your really broad and insightful presentations. So now I'd like to engage the attendees with into a conversation with the presenters. So attendees, please start entering your questions for the presenters into the chat, and then, or you could also raise your hand, and Mark is going to read off the questions in the chat and call on people. But to start the discussion off, I'll make an observation and a couple of questions that occurred to me while listening to the presentations. So what we heard today was that oak trees support a great diversity of birds and other animals. And then there are other kinds of trees that are amongst us that go unused. And it occurred to me during the talk that oak trees function like a combo multifamily housing and mixed-use development in the natural world. Oak trees, they're the housing, the supermarket, the work and hunting grounds, the meeting and breeding places for birds and other animals. They're more so than for other kinds of trees. Oaks support density and biodiversity. And the act of planting one oak tree is somewhat of a communal act. It benefits the greater good and future generations. So that was an observation that I made. And so I have two follow-up questions stemming from that observation to all the presenters. What difference can what difference can planting a single oak tree in a neighborhood that has no oak trees make? Like, what change do we expect to see if there's just one single action that happened of planting an oak tree in an area devoid of oak trees? So that's the first. And then my second question is, how can this single act of planting an oak tree be celebrated? How can it be acknowledged or raised up and made known to other people living in Los Angeles County? So those are my two questions for the presenters.
I'd be happy to tackle the first part of that about what if you planted an oak in a neighborhood, what it could do. And I'll just share research that we're doing right here at Cal State LA right now. Cal State LA is in the Repetto Hills and right on the southern rim of the San Gabriel Valley. And it was formerly an oak and walnut woodland on the north facing slopes. But we really, we've kind of paved over a lot of that. And we recently got a large grant, a CAL FIRE grant, to plant 2,000 native trees and shrubs throughout campus. And we did a research project looking at what happens when you're planting some of these native plants. How long does it take for insects to colonize? How long does it take birds to start using those? And we did a little native and non-native thing too, just to make the research a little bit more in line with some of the stuff we're interested in my lab. And the coast live oak was really pretty quickly colonized by a very diverse population of insects. Birds were using the trees. There's been acorns on campus. We've been seeing more scrub jays on campus. And so when you do that, this area was formerly lots of oaks, but we took them away. And so now that we bring them back, it was pretty quick in terms of these really interesting native species coming back and using that area. So if you were to do that in your neighborhood, wherever you were living in LA, it might not have been a formally treed part of the city, but you likely will notice some differences in terms of wildlife using those trees, in particular coast live oak.
So I'd like to sort of jump on that and build on what Eric said. I think there's a lot of really important connectivity that occurs when people plant a tree. And it occurs on the campuses, whether it's lots of trees or not as many trees. But I would like to suggest that we celebrate those that help to plant and that are actively taking time to either protect volunteers that have come up on their yards or so that they can grow into a mature tree, or that are helping on the many planting projects that occur throughout the county. And create an Oak Steward Club of some kind that people can join online. And it doesn't have to be fancy, but I think there's something really nice about acknowledging that effort and that contribution to our community, because it's a long-term thing. And then I think Dan should talk about how do we mark those and keep those going so that we know what to look for the future.
Yeah, well, I'll just say, Caroline, I love your analogy about it being a mixed use, or that's where they live, that's where they go shop, that's where they go eat. I think that's an important image for people, and I think that connects them more with nature. I think some of us are very nature minded, and we want to, grow habitats in our front yard, like Eric was showing in his presentation. But not everyone thinks that way. They just think we're separate from nature. The trees are separate from us. I think the more people can kind of relate on that, I guess, spiritual level or whatever, and planting an oak kind of symbolizes that. It's going to take a long time to grow, but you're buying into something, and you're looking beyond just yourself, which I think a lot of people need to do if we're going to be rebuilding habitats. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what there it is.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah. Oh, Rosie has her hand up.
sorry. I just wanted to say that trees, coast live oak trees grow pretty quickly. And it's not, you don't have to wait more than about 10 years to have a really nice tree. And we did a great experiment out at Descanso Gardens years ago, where we planted acorns, small seedlings, 5-gallon and 15-gallon and 24-inch box trees to see which one grew fastest. And it was actually the acorns and the little seedlings. And within 10 years, they were bigger than the 24-inch box tree. So I think there's a misperception that oaks grow slowly. They don't. They grow really well when you take care of them.
That is so interesting. Thank you, Rosie.
Caroline, if I may intervene, I see that we have a number of questions in the Q&A and they're sort of lumped into some kind of buckets. So I was hoping maybe I could distill a few of them and see if we can have further conversation. I know that we've talked a little bit about, and some of the questions are about how else can people, get involved in trying to plant more oak trees and protect them and that sort of stuff. But other questions are there about are there even more technologies that we may be able to embrace to help further the protection and propagation of oak trees? And I'll just pose that as a real quick question to the panelists, and then I'll take a look to see if I can distill some of these other Q&A questions. Well, Rosie.
So with tools like iNaturalist that allows you to take a georeferenced photo and post it, there are some really interesting and available ways that we could engage the public in terms of documenting what they're seeing in terms of recruitment of trees, as well as if they're actually planting. And I don't know if LA County Planning has ever collaborated with iNaturalist to look at some of the information that's posted there, but it's pretty impressive stuff. And after hearing Dan's talk, I'm thinking that all of our bad beetle people need to get connected to Dan and the Tree Hub, as well as all of the groups that are doing planting events throughout the county to actually document where those plantings are occurring. Because most of the time we're taking GPS coordinates for these trees anyway. So it's easy enough to pass that along.
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, Eric.
I can speak a little bit about the idea with, this isn't technology, but harnessing brilliant young minds. So being at a university and in the business of training and teaching, we often will run course-based undergrad research projects. And if there are questions, and I'm just posing this to everybody who's listening, if there are questions such as what are the insects found in that zone 0 area on buildings, or something that would be a suitable project for a semester-long course, like an Ecosystems of California course or a field ecology course, those are things where people can engage faculty like myself to get answers to these things and have science-based decisions that go right into some of the planning. And it's not a technological thing, but it is a way to integrate science, teaching, education, engagement, all of that. And I encourage people to reach out to folks like myself. Rosie will have lots of connections too, and these are things that we love to do. We love to collaborate. We love to have our data be applied and to be helpful for planning, for whatever it might be.
Thank you. Dan, did you want to make a comment, Dan, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just speak to the iNaturalist thing that Rosie mentioned. And this also, I know, relates to one of the questions someone asked about submitting photos, like having something available for all the public to do that. Different agencies, do different surveys, and there's survey tools with your phone that you could easily do that sort of thing. But we don't have that capability necessarily, or I don't know if we're going to do that. But iNaturalist, that is a GIS layer that's available. Esri, the people who make our GIS software, they've partnered with them, and they have a really cool app actually that has all the observations mapped out, and a cool graph about what types of species they are. So I'll put a link to a blog post in the chat, and that goes into that, and that also links you to the Living Atlas, they call it. And I think this is something we could also showcase on our hub site along with the other apps that we have. So yeah.
Thank you, Dan. I know that, we all know that trees have lifespans, and oak trees are very interesting because they typically have very long lifespans. They can move into centuries. And a lot of times, I think as planners, we're dealing with things like oak trees as cultural landmarks, but they also, have ecological services, as both Eric and Rosie have pointed out. So does there come a point in time when we're thinking about regulating, and that's what we do, planners regulate land use, and part of that is private property, and we're taking a look at oak trees, and of course we have an ordinance in the county. But part of that equation, is there an issue about what age of trees we should plant, i.e. like saplings, or should we put more emphasis on older trees? I want to pose that question because I think a lot of people, I've seen a lot of those kinds of questions in the Q&A, sort of in that realm. What's better to do? Rosie?
All of the above.
Oh, okay. Just do it all.
I think what's really important to think about is that when left to their own devices, oak trees recruit in pulses. And when it's a really good mast year, when the rains are appropriate, you get tons and tons of seedling volunteers that will come up. And not all of them will make it to becoming mature trees. But we really need all those different age classes and layers if we're going to make this work. Because it's only by thinking in tree time scales of 100 to 200 years that we're really going to effectively be able to plan for the future and ensure that we have oak woodlands into the future. So that's why seedlings and acorns in some places, other larger trees, if you're planting a street tree, there's so many different abuses, you really kind of have to go with a larger tree. Otherwise, it's not going to necessarily survive. So there's different places with different sizes. And I think it's important for us to keep the door open and do all of the above.
Thank you. And does it matter if we start having hybridization or anything else like that? Is that, I guess maybe that's all part of the longer term natural process of oak tree propagation, maybe.
So it looks like the pollen of each individual tree goes somewhere between 200 and 500 meters. And if it meets another tree in that time, that's when pollination occurs. But the oaks hybridize all the time anyway. So it's not like it's a new and different thing. They've been doing that for as long as there have been oak trees.
Thank you. So this has been a really terrific discussion, and we do have a bit more time, and I know Caroline will probably close out with a few concluding remarks. However, was there anything else, Caroline, that you wanted to pose as a question directly to our panelists?
Not for me.
Okay, and I'm looking back at the Q&A, and we talked a little bit about technology. I do think, and I will admit this, I think technology is massively important for us. I think that data collection is supremely important. And I've always thought that to ensure that we, really understand how our policy interventions are working, we have to have the data. And we have to be thinking long-term. We have to look in the past, and we have to, consider what's going on now, but we have to think about the future. And if we don't have good data to do that, it's hard to evaluate. And this is, to me, crucially important. And I'm so happy that the county is working on the tree hub as a way to move us in that direction. I think that can only benefit us. So, Rosie, please.
Just to hit on a couple questions in the chat. One is, where can you get seedlings? And the other is, if I've got thousands of seedlings, who could use them? And it's Los Angeles County Forestry Department does produce lots of seedlings that are available for free. The problem with taking seedlings that people are propagating on their own is the issue of contamination by Phytophthora. And while that impact to root zones is not such a big deal in the built environment, it means that much as we love to have new baby trees, we can't necessarily plant those into the public wild spaces and national parks and state parks. So I think it would be really wonderful, and I don't know who would be the best to do this, but having sort of a, in the tree hub, maybe a chat where people could say, I have 1,000 oak seedlings. Can I donate those to, you know, local school campuses, to other places in the built environment where those trees could be really helpful and useful, even if we can't plant them into the wildlands.
Okay, thank you. I guess I would like to make one last comment before I turn it back to Caroline. And that's the idea that I know we're talking about oak trees, they're important, and it's really nice to plant them in a lot of different places. Is there a thought that maybe there are places that if we're thinking about planting an oak tree, maybe it's not a good idea to? Or maybe what I've always thought is maybe we need to learn to live amongst the oak trees. Because I was thinking about the one picture you had there, Rosie, about this great big tree right next to it, looked like some kind of a shopping center. And I thought that's a really cool picture, but then you told me it fell over, so that made me sad. So is that something that we as planners or, you know, arborists and all that other sort of stuff, when we're thinking about planting oak trees, we need to consider sometimes where we're actually placing them in? It may be putting them in harm's way and not a benefit.
So space is always a consideration, right? And putting trees, you know, that's the arborist mantra, right tree for the right place. And
Okay.
so I think that guideline applies to oak trees in spades. It's really hard to put an oak and expect it to thrive in a 2-foot or 3-foot street tree well. They need to have, you know, at least 10-foot wide street tree area in which to grow and really mature. But as Eric pointed out, you see allays of street trees of coast live oaks in places like San Marino and Pasadena, because they do have that amount of width in their parking, sidewalk, front lawn areas. So as planners, you know, you can think ahead about how do we make our street areas suitable for us to be able to plant trees that are large and mature, like our oak trees. So those are things that where planning and arboriculture should really be coming together.
Thank you. And as I mentioned in my little spiel there, you know, planners were the most interdisciplinary of all practitioners. So we have to think about all these different things. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to our moderator, please, Caroline.
Thanks, Mark. Well, thanks everybody for coming today and joining us for Community Planning Month. I hope that you felt that you learned something today from spending your time with us. I want to also thank Elena Salcido from the APA LA director, who is the APA LA section director, and for co-sponsoring this event. And a very special thanks to Eric and Daniel and Rosie for coming and sharing your research and your work with us. And okay, so I think there's the APA AICP credit page. This is the information for those of you who are attending this meeting and you would like to claim your AICP CM Sustainability and Resilience credit. We'll be following up with an email after this presentation, so you can get that link that's on the slide right now. And so that's it for today. Thank you everybody for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye-bye now.
All right. Thank you all. Bye.